Some countries wear their vampires like folklore medals. A neat lineage, the Balkans, the Carpathians, the Ottoman borderlands. The classic vampire map, inked in garlic engraved soil. But England hides its undead. Here in England, the vampire doesn't always arrive as a velvet aristocrat. Often it arrives as something older, rougher, more local. Not a count, but a corpse that won't behave, because the English tradition isn't always vampire in the later cinematic sense. It's revenant. The dead returned with weight, with breath, with contagion. A thing not metaphorical, but physical. A body that rises like a bad idea you can't bury. And the unsettling truth is this. England has been telling stories about the restless dead for a long time. So long, in fact, the word vampire shows up late, after the fear has already lived in the hedgerows for centuries. So, tonight we walk the English line of the undead, from medieval revenants to the great Victorian vampire tale of Croglin Grange, to modern London's strangest cemetery panic. And somewhere along the way we'll meet the real heart of the vampire story. Not a monster in a cape, but the idea that death sometimes doesn't close properly. Long before the word vampire entered English, dark whispers of the restless dead already haunted the land. Archaeologists have unearthed Anglo-Saxon skeletons that were staked in their graves, iron spikes driven through the shoulder, heart and ankle, a fate reserved for the dangerous dead to pin them in a place. In the ancient Minster town of Southwell, a 6th and 7th century burial was found with such grisly precautions, suggesting the living harboured a dread that some corpses might rise again. This deviant burial practice, decapitating or staking those deemed wicked or unnatural, was a last resort to ensure that this person did not come back. Even in those early medieval days, the seeds of vampire folklore were sown in blood and iron beneath the sod of England. If English vampire lore has a first serious archivist, it's William of Newburgh. He writes like a man who knows you're going to roll your eyes and writes anyway. He tells of corpses that got up at night, not as pale romance, not as gothic theatre, but as social emergency. In his world, a revenant isn't an interesting tale, it's a public health incident. One of his most chilling notes is the way these things spread fear like smoke. They move through a town and the town begins to change. People stop going out at night, they bar their doors, they watch each other, and then, in some accounts, sickness follows, and that dread becomes almost practical. Not just we're scared, but this might poison the air. Because in medieval England, the Revenant isn't only a predator, it's a pollution. A bad death leaking into the living world. And then comes the Berwick upon Tweed Revenant. Berwick, a border town with weather that already feels like a warning. A dead man rises and roams at night, and dogs howl behind him like he's dragging hell on a leash. The town panics, not because a ghost is spooky, but because this thing feels infectious, like its very movement through the streets is corrupting the place. The community leaders met in council. The more superstitious feared being physically beaten by the Revenant if they dared wander at night, while the more rational shrewdly warned that the very air was becoming infected by the creature's presence. Its pestiferous corpse, whirling through the atmosphere, might breed a plague unless a remedy was found. Determined to protect their town, they recruited a band of young men renowned for courage. Under cover of night, these 10 stout-hearted fellows opened the grave. And what they found was shocking enough. The corpse was unnaturally preserved and bloated with foul vitality. Steeling themselves, they dragged the horrible carcass out and cut it limb from limb, and then burned the pieces to ash. According to William of Newburgh, even the undead fiend itself had confessed the summit met that no peace would come to the town until the body itself was given to the flames. This next case actually comes from Scotland, so even though the title was English Vampires, I've cheated a little bit here because it's one of Newburgh's own tales. Newburgh adds 2 more uncanny stories set in the far north. One at the monastery of Melrose in the Scottish borders. A corrupt monk, a priest so fond of the hunt that locals nicknamed him Hunderpriest, the Hound Priest, died and was buried in the abbey grounds. He had led a secular and pious life, and in death he found no rest. Soon after burial, this reprobate clergyman began to prowl from his grave at night, causing great disturbances around the monastery. The spectral priest, groaning and murmuring, repeatedly circled the lodging of his former mistress, tormenting the living with his presence. The frightened woman appealed to the monks for help. 2 brave brothers of the abbey, armed and resolute, kept vigil in the graveyard one cold midnight to confront the fiend. For hours nothing stirred until at last the earth itself heaved and the revenant monk crept forth. One monk had momentarily left his post and the other found himself suddenly face to face with the corpse, reeking of death and rushing at him with unnatural rage. In that fraught moment, the lone monk did not falter. He swung his axe and struck the walking corpse a terrible blow. The creature howled, gushing black blood, and fled back toward the grave of the monk in pursuit. The very tomb was seen to open of its own accord and swallow the wounded revenant back into the earth, shutting behind it. At dawn, the monks unearthed the grave. They found the body as expected, except it bore the fresh wound of the axe, clotted with gore in the shroud. To ensure this unholy dog priest troubled them no more, They hauled the corpse outside the monastery walls and burned it to ashes, dispersing the ashes to the winds. Thus, Melrose Abbey was cleansed of its monster. Newburgh closes the case by vouching that he heard it directly from religious men, a testament to how seriously such accounts were taken. The final and most lurid of Newburgh's tales took place at a castle he calls Anantis, likely a fortress in Northumbria. Some later readers have linked it to Alnwick Castle. The story here reads like a macabre morality play. A fugitive man of evil conduct had taken refuge at the castle, marrying a local wife. Racked by rumours of her infidelity, he set a trap to catch her in the act. He feigned a journey, then snuck back and hid in the rafters above her bedchamber. Unfortunately for him, the adultery he suspected turned out to be real. He spied his wife in bed with a young lover. In a fury, the cuckolded man lost his footing and fell from the beam, crashing to the floor at the lover's feet. The adulterer fled, and the treacherous wife helped her injured husband to rise, while smoothly denying any wrongdoing. The fall left the man badly shaken and soon deathly ill. Consumed by rage and unshriven of his sins, he died within days, destitute of Christian grace, as Newburgh puts it. But burial brought him no peace. Through the handiwork of Satan, this tormented soul began to rise from the grave at night. Like the Berwick fiend, he was accompanied by an eerie pack of howling dogs, and his presence was so fearsome that no townsfolk dared venture out after dark. Those who did risk a beating by the vagrant corpse found black and blue if they were caught outside. Worse, a deadly pestilence descended on the village with doors barred each night. People still sickened in their homes. The pestiferous breath of the Roman corpse seemed to seep through the cracks, poisoning the very air. An eyewitness monk recounted that the once populous town soon became almost deserted, as residents died or fled this plague of the undead. Only a remnant remained, huddling in fear and prayer. On Palm Sunday, the local priest convened a gathering of the wise men to discuss how to save the town. During this meeting, two young brothers who had lost their own father to the Revenant's pestilence decided to take matters into their own hands. Grief and anger steeled their resolve. This monster has destroyed our father and will destroy us too unless we act. Let us ensure our safety and avenge our father's death. Let us dig up this bane and burn it with fire, they said. And so, while the village leaders feasted and hesitated, the brothers seized a spade and crept to the graveyard. They dug feverishly at the cursed grave, and suddenly, not far beneath the soil, their spade struck something solid. Pulling back the earth, the brothers uncovered a horrifying sight. The corpse of the husband, swollen to enormous corpulence, the face bloated and suffused with blood, its burial shroud shredded to bits, as if the body had gorged itself on the blood of the living. Undeterred, the young men delivered a mighty blow to the corpse with the spade. Immediately, such a stream of blood gushed forth that it was as though a giant leech had been squeezed. Indeed, William of Newburgh remarks that the carcass might have been taken for a leech filled with the blood of many persons. A striking description that parallels modern notions of a blood-sucking vampire. The brothers dragged the bloated body out of the village and built a pyre. One of them, recalling the law that these fiends could not die until the heart was removed, drove the spade into the corpse again and tore out its heart with his bare hands. They ripped the heart into pieces and set the corpse ablaze. Villagers, alerted by the commotion, arrived just in time to witness the infernal spectacle of the hellhound being consumed by fire. As flames purified the corrupted flesh, the pestilence that had ravaged the town miraculously ceased, as if the air corrupted by the corpse's motions were cleansed by the fire. Newburgh writes the Great Terror was over. The story in particular, with its geyser of blood and extracted heart, reads like pure Gothic fiction, yet it was recorded in the sober church chronicle of the 1200s. It shows how deeply the fear of the restless dead had sunk into the medieval psyche, even in England. Newburgh himself, reflecting on these cases, noted that nothing like them was recorded in ancient writings, implying such horrors were a new phenomenon of his era, and that if he tried to write all the tales he'd heard of corpses walking, it would be an endless task. He chose to relate only a few, as a warning to posterity. In these few, however, we find the full template of the classic vampire, the unholy grave walker, bloated with stolen blood, spreading death until dispatched by decapitation, stake, fire, or absolution. Medieval England, it seemed, knew the vampire long before the word existed, cloaked in the Latin of monastic chroniclers, who struggled to make sense of the corpses of evil or vengeful individuals rising from the graves to harm the living. Centuries later, the ground itself offers testimony. At Wharram, Percy, a deserted medieval village, bones are found treated in a way that's hard to explain as ordinary burial practice. Cuts, breaks, burning, the kinds of actions that look like someone trying to make absolutely sure this person does not come back from the dead. It's one of the most unnerving parts of the English vampire story, because it's not a tale, it's a trace, and it suggests something important. Even if we debate the literal reality of revenants, we can't debate that people once feared them enough to do unspeakable things to the dead, which means the undead were not only monsters, they were also beliefs powerful enough to shape behaviour. Walter Map, Denugis Caralium, the Hereford Revenant. There's a kind of fear that doesn't scream, it counts. Walter Map, courtier, cleric, collector of strange truths and stranger lies, tells of a village haunted not by a ghostly moan, but by a voice that chooses you. A knight named William Lordin comes to the bishop's court, desperate. He goes to Gilbert Folliot, Bishop of Hereford, later Bishop of London, and he says in plain, panicked terms, "A man of evil life has died in his village, unchristian, unshriven, wrong, and then after 4 nights, the dead man starts coming back, not once, not as an omen, but every night. He walks back into the village like he still has business there, and he does something far worse than rattle chains. He summons people by name, one by one, aloud, and when you are called, you fall sick, and within 3 days you die. The village starts to empty, not by migration, but by attrition, a slow harvesting, a voice selecting bodies like a reaper with a roll call. The bishop, astonished, offers a theory that feels like medieval horror logic at its rawest. Perhaps God has allowed an evil angel to move around inside the dead man's corpse. And then he gives instructions that sound like a ritualized emergency procedure. Exhume the body, cut off the head with a spade, sprinkle the corpse in the grave with holy water, rebury it. So they do it. And still, the problem continues. The Revenant returns. The village keeps thinning, until one night the dead man calls not a peasant but the knight himself. He calls William thrice, like a curse spoken loudly, but William Lordin is strong of body and proved valour, Map says, and instead of hiding he runs out with his sword drawn. He chases the thing back to its grave, and there, right at the lip of the earth, as the creature collapses into the hole like a body remembering it's supposed to be dead, William strikes. He cleaves its head to its neck. And from that hour the ravages stop. The wandering pestilence ends. No more names, no more 3-day countdown. Map ends with a chilling little shrug, the most honest part of all. He knows the facts of the death, but the cause, not the why. And that's the core of English Revenant lore in one sentence. We can describe the footprint in the mud, but not what made it. In these traditions, the Revenant is often less a singular character and more a symptom. A wrong life, a wrong death, a wrong burial, and the village pays for it. What matters in Walter Map's world is how the living respond. They don't argue about symbolism. They don't do polite skepticism. They act. And the action again and again is the grim medieval refrain. Open the grave, stop the body, close the door. Because the Revenant in English law is a door that refuses to shut. So there was a general panic in the medieval age about revenants, possibly caused by a mix of folklore and plagues. Was there a truth to these stories? Who knows? Interesting to me that these cases seem to be focused on the borderlands between England and Scotland, or England and Wales, areas of vast wilderness, open skies and villages and settlements few and far between, a place of many comings and goings. An interesting side note about the English medieval historian William of Newburgh is that his writings are not only the core documents of the Revenant cases, but also have some other interesting cases, such as the Green Children of Woolpit, another interesting story for another time. So there we have it, the medieval phenomenon of revenants, part zombie, part vampire. Some legends are born in a village. Croglin is born at a dinner table. The writer Augustus Hare tells us he heard it from a man he calls Captain Fisher, a friend, a gentleman, a name with old family confidence, who, after the usual after-dinner ghost stories, decides to offer one of his own. Not a campfire rumour, not something I heard. Something connected, he says, to his own family. And that detail matters, because it frames the tale the way Victorian England liked its horrors best, close enough to polite society to feel plausible, but far enough away up in Cumbria to feel wild. Captain Fisher begins with lineage and land. His family, he says, has held on to an old place in Cumbria for many hundreds of years, with the weird name Croglin Grange, and the house has an odd defining feature. It has never, at any point in its long existence, been more than 1 story high. A single-story house is important in a vampire story. It means there's no upstairs to retreat to, no symbolic higher ground, only the thin horizontal plane of domestic life and the dark outside pressing in. Fisher says that when the family outgrew Croglin, they didn't expand it, they moved south to Thorncombe near Guildford, and they let the house out, and their tenants at first are perfect. 2 brothers and a sister, kind to the poor, welcome in local society, happy in the house, popular in the district. It's a detail that gives the story its English tone. This isn't a cursed family doing the occult, it's good neighbours, good manners. Then the weather turns. There's a day dreadfully, annihilatingly hot, Fisher says. Heat so thick it feels like the world is holding its breath. They watch the sunset and the moon rise over the belt of trees that separates the lawn from the churchyard. The lawn becomes silver, shadows lie across it like black bars. And when they go to bed, all on the ground floor because the house has no upstairs, the sister can't sleep. She fastens the window, leaves the shutters open and watches the night. That's when she notices the first wrong thing. 2 lights, flickering in and out among the trees that stand between the garden and the churchyard. She watches them, trying to make them ordinary. Lanterns perhaps, a traveller, a late walker, but they move wrong. And as they draw closer, she sees they are fixed in something dark, a definite ghastly something, gaining size and substance as it approaches. And then the modern mind does what it always does at the edge of terror. It tries to negotiate with itself. Don't scream, don't be ridiculous, it's only shadows. But the body doesn't care what the intellect wants. She is seized by uncontrollable horror. Her voice won't come. She can't bring herself to cross the small distance to the door because it would mean moving nearer to the thing. Then she thinks for one blessed second it's passing by, going round the house, not coming for her. She leaps to the door to unlock it, and behind her she hears it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. A hideous brown and withered face with flaming eyes is suddenly there at the window. She takes comfort in the window being fastened until the scratching stops and becomes a pecking sound. The thing is working at the lead. A diamond pane falls in. A long bony finger reaches through, turns the handle, opens the window, and the creature comes in. It crosses the room. It twists its fingers into her hair. It drags her head over the side of the bed and bites her violently in the throat. And only then does her voice return. That classic detail of nightmare. The scream arrives late, after the violation has already happened. Her brothers hear it. They run, but the door is locked on the inside. They force it with a poker, and by the time they're in, the creature has gone through the window. Their sister is found bleeding, unconscious, the bed turned into a scene. And now comes the very Victorian pivot. They attempt rationality. They go away for a long holiday to recover. And when it's time to decide whether to return, the sister argues for it with almost ridiculous English firmness. So they return to Croglin, and the winter passes peacefully. But in March, when the year is still raw at the edges, she wakes again to the same sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The same face, the same eyes. This time she screams immediately. The brothers rush out with pistols. The creature is already scudding away across the lawn. One brother fires and hits it in the leg. It scrambles over the wall into the churchyard and disappears into a vault that belongs to a family long extinct. And here we hit the hinge where Croglin snaps back into the older English tradition. Because what happens next isn't the elegant vampire hunter stuff of later fiction. It is medieval, it is communal, it is practical. They open the vault in daylight in front of witnesses. The tenants summoned, the community gathered, and inside they find a scene of desecration. Coffins broken, contents horribly mangled, scattered. Only one coffin remains intact, and even its lid has been lifted and left loose. They open it, and there is the body, and there is the fresh wound in the leg. The story gives you that cold click of confirmation. The nocturnal thing and the diurnal corpse are the same. And then England's oldest answer to the restless dead rises again. The answer you see in medieval Revenant chronicles. Not debate, not psychology, fire. They drag the corpse out and burn it until it's reduced to ash. The kind of ending that feels less like justice and more like sealing a crack in reality. And Croglin ends the way that older Revenant cases often end, with the village trying to restore the world's rules by destroying the evidence that the rules ever broke. Croglin's official birth into print is Augustus Hare's memoirs, written in the late 1890s and published across 1896 and 1900. The vampire episode is presented as something Hare heard from Captain Fisher and recorded as an anecdote. Later writers republished and argued about it. Montague Summers, for example, helped circulate the story in the 20th century and noted similarities between Croglin and earlier vampire fiction like Varney the Vampire, a possible family legend that becomes vampire-shaped at exactly the time when England is falling in love with vampire-shaped stories. And because it's Cumbria or Cumberland as that part was once known, it also taps that Victorian idea of the rural old country still being half medieval, a place where ancient stone and older beliefs linger, where the modern world's neat explanations don't quite reach. Croglin looks like a classic vampire tale, but its skeleton is Revenant logic. The dead as contamination, the community as exorcist, and the solution is physical. Find the body, destroy the body, burn the body. That's the exact rhythm you see in the medieval cases when the dead won't rest. The living don't write poetry about it, they open the grave. Croglin simply reskins that old English dread in Victorian language. And because it does, it becomes one of the few homegrown English vampire legends with enough cinematic structure to stand beside the continental tradition. Not because it is proven, but because it is perfectly built. Highgate Cemetery is one of those places that looks like it remembers too much. A Victorian city for the dead, angels blackened by rain, names half-eaten by lichen, mausoleums like locked mouths, and ivy everywhere, ivy that doesn't decorate the stone so much as take it back. By the late 1960s, Highgate wasn't a polished monument, it was overgrown, half-wild, cinematic without meaning to be, a place where the modern world thinned out at the edges. And that matters because legends don't just happen anywhere, they happen where the atmosphere is already leaning in. The first sparks weren't a vampire, not formally, not cleanly. They were the usual sort of cemetery things, the sort of report you hear and half laugh at until you don't. A man writes a letter to the local paper. He says he saw something on Christmas Eve. A figure, grey, moving strangely. Something that didn't feel like a person out for a stroll. And he doesn't declare it a monster. He does something far more dangerous, culturally speaking. He asks a question. Has anyone else seen anything odd? And suddenly the cemetery speaks back, not with a voice but with a chorus. Letters come in. People describe a tall dark man, a face seen through bars, a figure that seemed to glide rather than walk, a spectral cyclist, a woman in white, bells, voices, the feeling of being watched. Not one consistent thing, not a single creature you could sketch, but the vibe is there, the communal shiver. And then arrives the moment when a haunting becomes something else. Because the public imagination doesn't like a mess of unrelated ghosts. It likes a shape, a headline, a single mask to put on the dark. And one man gives the darkness its mask. Sean Manchester, local paranormal investigator, theatrical, certain, steps forward and says, "This isn't just a ghost. This is a vampire." It's the kind of claim that turns a slow burning rumour into a fire. Because once you say vampire, you've changed the entire story. A ghost might be sad, a ghost might be a memory, but a vampire is a predator. A vampire implies intent, implies hunger, implies that the dead aren't merely lingering, they're hunting. And the cemetery, already gothic, already half ruined, becomes the perfect stage. Highgate looks like it was built for this role, and so the story starts to fit the place like a coffin fits a body. Then the press catches the scent, and the press does what it always does. It simplifies and sharpens and sells. A few ghost stories become one thing, one creature, one myth. Now it has a name you can print in bold, the Highgate Vampire. And then the most modern ingredient enters the ancient stew, rivalry. Because alongside Manchester, you have David Farrant, also investigating, also making claims, also refusing to be a footnote in somebody else's legend. So now it isn't merely is there something in the cemetery, it becomes who gets to define it, who gets to fight it, who gets to be the hero in the story the city is beginning to tell itself. The cemetery becomes more than a location, it becomes a spotlight. Interviews, counterclaims, the back and forth of two men trying to seize the steering wheel of a myth. And in that background the place itself just sits there, stone and ivy and locked gates, quietly letting humans do what humans do best. Make a story and then make it behave as if the story is true. Then comes the broadcast, a television segment airs. The story goes from local curiosity to public spectacle, and something very strange happens, something that, in its own way, is more unsettling than any monster. People show up. Not a few, Not a little group, a crowd. Hundreds by some accounts, spilling into Swains Lane like a pilgrimage, like a party, like a riot with a supernatural theme. Some climb the gates, some come with stakes, some come with crosses, some come with nothing but that bright-eyed hunger for a brush with the unreal. And the police are suddenly trying to stop a vampire hunt in London. It's absurd on paper, but at the same time it's ancient. Because this is what communities do when fear gets a narrative. They gather, they arm themselves, they go to the place where darkness is said to live, and they try to drag it into certainty. That night no vampire is publicly cornered, no coffin hauled into the street, but the legend doesn't need proof anymore, because now there are witnesses, not just to a figure in the trees, but to the event itself, to the raid, to the mass trespass, to the moment the city collectively stepped into its own gothic story. And after that, things curdle. Because once you've told people there's a vampire in a cemetery, some of them start acting like the solution is medieval. There were reports of graves disturbed, vaults broken into, coffins interfered with. And then the ugliest whisper of all, stories circulate about bodies being mutilated, charred remains, desecration. Even when details are debated or disputed, the shape of what happened is clear. The legend doesn't just live in words, it makes marks in the world. At one point, Farrant is arrested in the cemetery at night, caught in the act of trespass, carrying the tools of a story: crucifix, stake, props that become evidence when the police arrive. And Manchester continues to claim he has identified the vampire, even destroyed it, a private triumph that, like all folklore, survives mainly because it's repeated. Here's the truth: Highgate is not a clean entity case. It's a case about how the entity gets born. The sightings were scattered, the details inconsistent, the phenomena classic: faces, figures, feelings, lights, the sense of being watched. But once the word vampire was spoken loudly enough, the story found gravity. It pulled people into it. It turned a cemetery into a stage. It turned witnesses into actors. It turned investigators into rivals. It turned rumour into trespass. It turned fear into behaviour. And maybe that's the most unsettling thing of all, because if you ask, was there really a vampire in Highgate? You may never get a satisfying answer. But if you ask a deeper question, the question Highgate does answer: what happens when a culture decides there is a vampire? Then Highgate becomes chillingly clear. Because something did rise there in 1970. Maybe not from a coffin, but from a mixture of place and mood and media and human longing. A creature built of ivy shadow and newspaper ink, given teeth by belief, and released into the public imagination, where it still wanders even now, not in the cemetery, but in the story. And if you want the final sting, it's this: Highgate proves you don't need a vampire to get a vampire hunt. You just need a dark place, a few frightened witnesses, a hungry headline, and a city willing to lean into the night. David Farrant, the man who saw the first sighting in Highgate Cemetery of a grey figure and wrote into the Hampstead and Highgate Express. The man who, in a way, started it all, ended up having to live with the stigma of the case. He was arrested for interfering with remains and damaging memorials for 4 years, though he says he was innocent of these charges and was scapegoated by Satanists. He lived with the stain of the Highgate case and was tarred by the press as some sort of black magician due to some staged press photos with fake skulls. Actually, he was a psychic investigator and founded the British and Psychic Occult Society. Farrant never claimed what he saw was a vampire. Sean Manchester, on the other hand, was never tarred by the case, even though he is partly responsible for the media frenzy by performing a live exorcism of Highgate Cemetery on Friday the 13th of March 1970, which attracted press coverage and huge crowds which stormed the walls of the cemetery searching for the undead. His story is that there was actually a vampire there, a type of king vampire, which he later destroyed by driving a stake through its heart. He profited from the case, selling books and building a media identity as an exorcist. Though we have these pictures of him dressed as a Catholic bishop, he was no man of the church. He was never ordained and neither a priest nor bishop. So, reports of a top hat wearing vampire in a London cemetery floating above the ground instead of walking with fangs and orange-red eyes, was it true? Well, it seems highly unlikely. So what are these cases? Maybe they're not one thing. Maybe the vampire is a shared mask that different fears wear. 1. Disease, contagion and the medieval mind in the old accounts. Sickness often rides alongside the revenant. A village looks for a cause and the dead become suspects. Not symbolic suspects, literal ones. 2. The body's strange afterlife. Decomposition can mimic the uncanny. Bloating, blood at the mouth. If you expect quiet decay and you meet the grotesque realities of death, folklore fills in the rest. 3. Sleep paralysis and bedroom terror, crushing weight, night visitors, helplessness. It's an ancient human experience and it maps onto Revenant stories almost perfectly. 4. Social meaning, the bad dead. So many Revenants were people who died under a shadow. Violent, corrupt, feared, unloved. The community deals with them in death the way it wished it could in life, by controlling them. 5. Modern myth-making. Highgate as a case study. Highgate suggests vampires can be made by attention. A rumour becomes a narrative becomes a gathering becomes behaviour, and suddenly the story leaves marks in the world. And yet, even after we explain, something remains. Because explanations don't erase the fact that humans keep seeing the same shape in the dark, century after century. And maybe vampires give us our most uncomfortable truth. They are a psychic reflection of our own darkness, our fear of what we secretly might be in the mirror. Not a human reflection, but something else hidden within, something animal and carnivorous. Or yet perhaps this, our fascination and fear of death itself. The ancient archetype of the vampire or vampire-like beings has followed us through history and around the globe, our own dark reflection. Maybe England's vampires don't want to be in the modern spotlight. Maybe they prefer older mediums, mist, whisper, church bell distance, the window you swear you locked. Because England is a country made of layers, Roman roads under tarmac, medieval prayers under pub laughter, old grief under new houses, and the undead, the revenant, the vampire, the restless dead is what happens when one layer leaks into another. These stories survive because they're not only about monsters, they're about barriers and borders. The barrier between the living and the dead, the barrier between explanation and mystery, the barrier between it's just a story and I don't feel alone out here. And maybe the vampire is simply the name we give to that feeling, that the past is still hungry, not just for blood, but for attention, for memory, for a witness. So, if you ever find yourself on a quiet English lane with the hedgerows black and the sky low and the churchyard close, and you hear something, not quite footsteps, not quite wind, just remember, England doesn't shout about its vampires. England keeps them quiet. And on the right night, the country feels like it's holding its breath, as if waiting to see whether the grave will stay shut. There's an old straight road where my body goes cold, like a Roman road to the graves. And there they walk with the bodies at the solemn pace. The old Lych road, that's where we go. None of us can escape it. The old Lych road. There's a tree-lined road where the wind stirs the trees, and the crows cackle on the way, and the faces passed with dust and toil and sadness. The old Lych road, that's where we go. None of us can escape.